Anybody who wants to say you're dangerous, how about instead, let's have a discussion about the data and let's see what comes out of it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you think I'm saying something that's not correct, debate me on the merits on it. Don't just dismiss it out of hand and say, well, I disagree with it, therefore it's dangerous.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the FLCCC Alliance's weekly update. I'm Betsy Ashton. I'm your host and the creative director of the Alliance. We're here once a week. We run 45 minutes to an hour, probably going to go an hour tonight. I know, I can tell. We're here to tell you what's happening about the prevention and treatment of COVID-19 that our team of medical experts know works. Now, in just a minute, you're going to meet Mike Capuzzo because he's here with us. He's on the line. And one of our other favorite independent journalists, Mary Beth Pfeiffer, whose work you've been reading about in Trial Site News. And they're going to be here with one of our favorite physicians, critical care doctor, Dr. Eric Osgood. He's also a famous tweeter, and he's a super communicator, as well as just a top FLCCC Alliance doctor. So we've got a treat for you tonight. The topic, the information disconnect between what our medical team has been telling you for as long as we've been doing this, as long as they've been researching COVID and what works for it, and what you've been reading in other news outlets, the majority of them that seem to be somewhere else. They've been ignoring what we've been saying. And also what many of you have figured out, and you've been asking us, why have we stopped posting on Twitter? What's going on with our LinkedIn account? And where's the missing YouTube video? Well, we have been censored. Yep, we, a team of doctors with top credentials and hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers to our credit, called out, shut down for putting out misinformation. What? I mean, for researching and using the best scientific evidence in an effort to save lives. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're doing. And by the way, we are saving lives. You should read the letters that come in. It will be a lively discussion tonight. And then Dr. Osgood and our writers will take your questions. But first, you know what I have to do. I have to give you the disclaimer. Remember, this is not personal medical advice for you. We don't know what other medicines you take. We don't know what's going on inside your body. So whatever you hear about treatment, take it to your personal doctor, and the two of you decide what you need. The FLCCC Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit association. We are offering education and information. That's what we do. We're not selling drugs. We're not manufacturing drugs. We have no financial interest whatsoever in any of the drugs that are part of the protocols, ivermectin or anything else that we're talking about. This group came together just to try to save lives in the midst of a hellish pandemic. That's what we're doing. And that's what we hope to continue doing, to try to keep people well. We live on donations. And for those of you, and there are many of you out there, you know who you are, who are helping us. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Now, that's all I have to say. Let's get on with it. Dr. Osgood, are you ready to go and to introduce our guests?
I'm back again, once again, filling in for the mighty Pierre Corey, as I've been asked to do, and I'm always happy to step up and try to fill those shoes. And it's nice to be back here again. Yeah, and pretty insane that a group of physicians, some of the most widely published pulmonary and critical care doctors, being told by essentially tech platformers that they are engaging in misinformation. It's really a pretty upside down world. So just a couple opening comments from me. I watched those comments from Mike Capuzzo, and I had a lengthy discussion with him months ago, and he interviewed me. We had a great conversation. A little, nice blurb about me was put into that wonderful article, which was nice. It was quite an honor. And I listened to his cries and calls for his colleagues to get on this, basically. Come on, this is a good story. These are legitimate physicians. This is serious research. This is a good story. And I think about Mike Capuzzo. I think about Mary Beth. I think about you, Betsy. I think about others who I know who are well-credentialed journalists who, because you are engaging in this particular topic, get kind of shut out from the mainstream. It's just, you can't crack it. It's nobody wants to touch it. And I'm thinking about how sort of bizarre that is. And it's interesting, the last time I hosted the webinar was a couple days after 2021 World Press Freedom Day. I wanted to comment on that, but we had so much to talk about, I kind of refrained. But interestingly, every year World Press Freedom Day has a different theme. And I was reading about the theme of 2021, and the theme of World Press Freedom Day of 2021 was information as a public good. That's phenomenal. That's excellent. But then I read the Director General's comments about the meaning of information as a public good. And I want to just kind of get Mary Beth and Mike's thoughts on this, because I have a couple of my own and I find them a little dystopian. The theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day, information as a public good, underlines the indisputable importance of verified and reliable information. It calls attention to the essential role of free and professional journalists in producing and disseminating this information by tackling misinformation and other harmful content. And on the surface, that sounds pretty good, but when you think about it for a second, verified by whom, reliable according to whom, harmful according to whom? And if you've seen some of the literature that's been written on what's gone on, both in big tech and in media, what's essentially happened is that these platforms have enlisted this small cadre of doctors that they've chosen, who are mostly like Twitter celeb docs, with pretty much a uniform point of view, who are essentially the doctors that have been appointed to decide what's misinformation and what's not, and get to decide what gets labeled as this has to be suppressed, this isn't. So the concept of open and free press doesn't really seem to be embodied by those ideals. What that sounds like to me is our job is to amplify and uncritically assert as truth whatever official agencies say, and dismiss out of hand definitionally anything that contradicts what governments and public health agencies say. And that to me does not come across like press freedom. That comes across like state-run media. And this parallels a lot some of the changes I've seen in how physicians have treated one another. In that, Mike, when you and I talked, you were very interested to hear in how I would go on Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms, and that physicians in the middle of this pandemic coming at us 1,000 miles an hour, no one knows what to do. We're all sharing protocols for each other, sharing our collective accumulated clinical wisdom on how to best treat this disease. It was a communal environment. It was a collegial environment where people would listen to one another, apply techniques, look at emerging literature, do our best to share these things with each other. And I think by the time I spoke to you, that all changed. And it was more like, if you shared something, the responses you would get in these groups would be like, oh, what's next? Snake oil? Oh, that's not proven. I looked at that study. That study's crappy. Oh, that's dumb. I'm not going to do that. And it's just, physicians themselves fell into this trap of buying in uncritically to official narratives and not listening to each other anymore, and not listening to studies that previously we would have listened to. So I see a lot of parallels between what has happened in the medical community and what's happened among journalists in terms of an open and free press. And so with that, I want to launch it to you, Mike, and to you, Mary Beth. I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts. Am I being a little bit too critical of UNESCO in that statement about World Press Freedom Day, or do you agree that this is a little dystopian?
Mary Beth, you want to go ahead?
Sure, Michael. Three words really jumped out at me, Eric, that you said, state-run media. Because it does seem to me that there is control being asserted very widely across platforms and across the mainstream media of the message of this pandemic. And on the one hand, we have the media basically just mouthing this one single narrative, this one view of the pandemic, that we have to mask and we have to social distance and vaccines are good and not harmful, and that we have only certain treatments that we're allowed to discuss and we're allowed to put out there, and others we don't go near. the word ivermectin is radioactive for a lot of media outlets. But then on the other hand, we also have the social media outlets that are essentially today, it seems, an arm of the government, an arm of the NIH and the World Health Organization, and basically jumping off their policies and their guidelines in terms of what they will allow. It's getting worse by the day. It's affected me. I've been, told that I have endangered public health by posting an article in which I interviewed a Yale physician who runs a large laboratory at Yale University, is published widely. This is news. And it's astounding to me, really, that we're in this position where something that is legitimate news from a legitimate source is squelched. I fear for democracy because of the situation that I find us all in today. I fear for the health of many people who don't have access to things that, as Michael said, could save them. And lastly, before I turn it over to Michael, I would just like to say that his words just do my heart good. It's wonderful to hear him calling out other journalists and saying, please join us. Just take a look at this drug. Give it a chance. There is real evidence behind it. And the other thing is to see another journalist who, like me, has become an advocate for ivermectin. We need many more of us. So thank you, Michael.
Yeah, one thing I want to jump off that you just said right there was that it's no longer enough to say, I looked at that data, I'm not convinced. No, you are being dangerous is the new sort of comment du jour. I disagree with you equals you are dangerous. You are saying things that are dangerous because you disagree with me. And that's sort of been sort of a weaponized way to silence people. I've seen this to some extent. This exists in hospital culture. People will find these key words when they want to maybe write someone else up, and they'll say something like, this is endangering the patient's safety, even though that's a bit hyperbolic. The hyperbole of dangerous to describe anybody who is suggesting a particular interpretation of scientific evidence being different in US equals you are being dangerous, to me, is dangerous, because it is essentially using a bullying tactic to silence people who disagree with you, rather than arguing and debating science on the merits, which is what this is supposed to be all about. Anybody who wants to say you're dangerous, how about instead, let's have a discussion about the data and let's see what comes out of it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you think I'm saying something that's not correct, debate me on the merits on it. Don't just dismiss it out of hand and say, well, I disagree with it, therefore it's dangerous. And that's one thing you touched upon that I just wanted to comment on. So thank you for bringing it up. So yeah, Mike, what did you want to?
I think you're both right on the money. Doc, I think that the parallels with medicine are really intriguing to me, because one of the most shocking things to me, I was writing something today about this. The long journalistic tradition I guess since the progressive era, and we can debate whether or not there are sides on these things, but the journalists at the New York, who ran the New York Times and Washington Post, and I worked with at the Philadelphia Inquirer and Miami Herald, I think we're mostly liberals, but had a faith that humanity was and the system were worthwhile projects, and we're looking within the context of their biases to balance that and to get to deeper truths. But now you have this whole media ecosystem from the very highest to the very lowest, just doing all the kind of shaming and censoring that you're both talking about. So, for instance, at the very highest levels of the New York Times, think of the history of the New York Times. One of my mentors was David Halberstam, who, wrote The Best of the Brightest, and as a 28-year-old out of Harvard, went to the Vietnam War in 1962, and had the idea that he was going to be relaying information back from American heroes who were beating the bad guys like we did in World War II. And he and Neil Sheehan of the UPI pretty quickly, and others, Peter Arnett of I guess CNN now is known, but a guy from the Associated Press, Malcolm Brown, pretty much figured out that they were lying about everything. The commanders were lying about the war and started to tell the truth. And President Kennedy said, you better get that brash young guy from Harvard out. And they resisted that and reported this, dystopian nightmare of the Vietnam War that changed our history. And what were they doing? They were standing up to the official government narrative and saying, is it true? So we don't have that today anymore. We don't have the New York Times or the Washington Post standing up and saying, well, Mr. Fauci or Dr. Fauci, we understand that random control trials are important to medicine, but are they really the only thing? And why are you throwing out these other things? And why are you? So as a result, they're missing all the biggest stories in the world. Most critically, the death and dying of people who could be helped. One quick example, I know that Joe Verone, Dr. Verone, is such a hero down in Houston. And during the first Texas surge, since from the beginning of the pandemic, say May 11th, when it's announced, to the end of May, he had 60 patients come through, mostly poor Blacks, Mexican Americans, Mexicans, illegal immigrants, who he's all treating for free, did not lose one. And they're all in really high risk critical care groups. By July, when CNN, the Associated Press, and Reuters, all these well-respected giant global organizations, sent battalions of camera crews, videographers, reporters to and they spent good parts of a week there seeing everything. And they saw with their own eyes that most of the people were living and not dying. They saw with their own eyes, and Dr. Verone told them every second, we have a treatment here with Dr. Merrick and you and Dr. Corey that is saving 95% of the people in the world when the 40 to 80% are dying elsewhere in these serious conditions. They didn't report that. And not only that, they made it at CNN and in those other outlets look at like most people were dying, not living, when actually most of them were living. And they made Dr. Verone, one of the most famous, esteemed critical care guys in the world, look like an overwhelmed neighborhood doctor. And they only put in his mouth the political messages. It's all Trump's fault, and you have to social distance. And he didn't say that about Trump's fault, but he said, if only you people will listen, as if there's this whole politicized half of America that's stupid and doesn't understand science. They politicize the whole thing. But what a tragedy. How do you even begin to approach journalists withholding and lying like that? And I've been interested in one of the, I think we talk about big pharma and we talk about an oligarchy of media and that seems to be, fusing with the state and all kinds of things. But to me, the most intriguing thing is we need reporters like Mary Beth, who I think would win the Pulitzer in a right side up world. Look at her stuff at Trial Side News, who have just the human decency that I think is at its highest level expressed by you, Doctor and Dr. Corey, to say, I love this human being here to the extent I'm a professional, I want to save them. The Hippocratic Oath, the journalistic oath. I care enough that human beings are dying and I want to tell that the government is lying and let's save them. Where's that basic humanity to just kind of pile on these lies? That to me, even if we were to put in, new people at the NIH and clean house and get all kinds of reforms and put everyone in big pharma in jail, it's never going to hold unless we have a society where that kind of compassion that you used to associate maybe with teaching, religious teachings or whatever, it gets a hold of itself and reestablishes. Anyway, sorry to go on.
No, that's.
If I could jump in here, Eric.
Yeah, definitely.
The road that we're on now, we've been on for a while in terms of big pharma and the influence of money. And, I have been an investigative reporter for many years at the community level, acting as an advocate for the little guy, a true believer in the power of the press to influence change and to affect some form of social justice. And what brought me to COVID at this point in my career, which is late in my career, were two stories that I wrote previously on the opioid epidemic and Lyme disease. And the opioid epidemic was just a huge example of the power of money, greed, and medical stupidity combined to, kill more than 100,000 people easily. Then I got into Lyme disease, in which I found kind of two narratives, the one that was accepted in the mainstream and the one that was fostered by sick people who weren't being served by medicine. It's a complicated story, but it has parallels to what I see in COVID today, that with Lyme disease, there were only certain medical journals that would publish certain views of Lyme disease. The New England Journal of Medicine, Lyme disease is easily treated with antibiotics, end of story. And then there was this other group of, scrappy scientists who were saying, no, there's another way to do this, and weren't getting funded and weren't getting published in the major journals and so on. But, here we are today in a situation where, as Michael said, governments have lied. They've long lied about the Vietnam War, about weapons of mass destruction, and so on. But I think we are just in a situation where, it is truly an upside down world, and government is effectively benefiting from silencing the press, from keeping the message under wraps, from suppressing the media, as well as having social media do its bidding. The First Amendment to the Constitution for free press is basically, the first for a reason, because it is such a fundamental part of our democracy. And I know I'm sort of jumping all over the place here, but I think, just getting back to the theme of the evening, this censorship isn't just about how we, cure a disease or treat a disease. It's how we save a democracy. It's going down the tubes, and it's going there with the support of our government.
And our media.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I agree. And I think we've got to stand up and demand that the media do its job. I mean, I think we should be canceling our subscriptions and hitting the streets, like Pierre says, because it's just, it's terrible. I agree with everything you said, Mary Beth.
You mentioned what happened with the opioid crisis, and I see a lot of similarities to this, because essentially a handful of drug manufacturers, along with the American Pain Society, with a specific objective of making as much money as possible, completely reframed the way physicians and public health advocates were looking at a problem, which was pain, and balancing that against the risks of dependence and addiction. And they got an entire generation of physicians, as well as regulatory bodies like joint commissions, to buy into this. Pain is the fifth vital sign. If you do not liberally prescribe opioids and eliminate 100% of your patient's pain, you are being a bad, inhumane doctor. If you take the medicine as prescribed, it's very rare that you will go on to. We know these things aren't true, but they were pushed and they were believed, and the physicians and the medical community all bought into it. They didn't want to get dinged for not shoveling these medicines at people, and it created a crisis. We know COVID killed 560 or so thousand Americans, and this killed 550,000 Americans too. And they in this case, in COVID, what they've been able to do is they have been able to completely turn upside down the reality of how physicians and how medical recommendation making bodies actually go about recommending therapies. And they've gotten everybody to buy into this notion that until you have the ever elusive 10,000 patient per arm, double blind placebo controlled trial, that you withhold that treatment. You are inert until you have that. When in reality, we know that medical treatment guidelines come in many different strengths and grades. There are treatments out there considered basically standard of care that have not even close to the evidence that drugs like ivermectin, fluvoxamine, and others have. And fluvoxamine, SSRI's fluvoxamine, I want to throw that in there too, because the evidence we have for that class of medicine stopping and halting the progression to the cytokine storm is very impressive. And I do want to give a shout out to Steve Kirsch, who was on the show last week, who's been an incredible advocate for early treatment. He wrote a great article in Trial Site News as well. He's been, founder of the COVID Early Treatment Fund and great ally of FLCCC. And he has essentially challenged any member of the scientific establishment to essentially prove that the guidelines are correct and essentially make a coherent, cogent case that these medicines don't work. And anybody who can successfully do that will get $2 million. Sorry, I had to do Dr. Evil thing. Now, I wish
He's not kidding. He's not kidding.
No, I'm not joking. I joke around a lot. This is actually serious, and we have not had any takers yet. I wish I had that kind of money to throw around because I would challenge people to debate on this too. But
just on your point about the opioid crisis, which you comment on as a physician, well, I see it as a journalist, and journalism stepped up during the opioid crisis. There were a number of major groundbreaking series of articles. I'm not going to call mine groundbreaking. I did win an award for a series of articles I did on the opioid epidemic. I'm just waiting for the press to step up. I'm waiting for them to just write a story about censorship itself and the fact that messages can't get out, that nobody but the Wall Street Journal has even mentioned the censorship as an issue. And beyond that, why don't we have early treatments? Where is the New York Times in this picture? Michael, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, my answer is not very encouraging. I think I'm ready to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge with Pierre. I think they are the censors. They're playing their role in this sort of globalist reset. I mean, it sounds like they talk about conspiracy theories. Well, it turns out the two countries where conspiracy theories were most rampant were China and the Soviet Union. I wonder why. Because people do things that are not right and they do it on a massive scale. I'm afraid you talked about. I think they're missing. One of the sad things is that we're getting this divided society, where these global authorities on a global level make their global decisions, and they think they're brilliant, and they think they're doing the right thing, and people are suffering. They're not even hearing the screams of the suffering, which is journalists' job to listen to, down with the doctors and patients who are actually saving people and being denied treatments that would save more lives. One of the things that's really alarming, I live in a small town where the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is, which is one of the top academic or largest academic medical centers in the country. And the doctors there are afraid. Is that happening, Dr. Osgood? I mean, that's one of the many stories they've missed. They missed the stories that it's a two-stage disease. They missed the stories that ivermectin could save the world. They missed the stories that math could save the world. And they seem to be missing the story and be part of the problem. Our neighborhood doctors, our family doctors, our most respected ICU doctors are either falling in line or afraid of losing their jobs if they prescribe something that would have been routine to prescribe in the before time. Is that too dramatic, Dr. Osgood?
No, that's not dramatic at all. I've had physicians tell me, look, you know what? I think you guys are onto something, but after everything that's happened, we're going to just stick to the official narratives, the official guidelines. I'm not rocking the boat because, I'm worried about what's going to happen. Am I going to be retaliated against them? Yes, it's not hyperbolic. It's not over dramatic. And it's sad because we're not talking about medicines that are either relatively new, highly expensive with concerning side effect profiles. We're talking about, in this one particular medicine, ivermectin, we're talking about something that has been distributed close to 4 billion times, one of the only medicines that is considered a candidate for MDAs, mass drug administrations, widely distributed through healthy populations, including small children, for diseases where, again, the basis of evidence for those diseases is not even as much as what we have for COVID-19 without batting an eye. Now, all of a sudden, we don't know if it's safe. All of a sudden, we don't really, let's move the goalpost. Okay, we've got some evidence that, sure, it accelerates viral clearance. Sure, people's lymphocyte counts seem to be coming up. Sure, we've seen some improvements in who progresses to get sick, but that's not enough. First, we need to see a very large trial showing this large reduction in deaths. Well, we have studies where it reduces deaths. Well, those studies aren't good enough. We want to see a study that looks like this. So the goalpost keeps shifting from, there's no evidence this works, and you press them on it, and then they move the goalpost to, well, there's no proof it's a miracle cure. That's not how we discuss medicines. That's not medical talk. There's a lot of medicines that we use routinely. There's no proof that they're miracle cures. Physicians don't discuss treatments that way. Is there evidence of an effect size? Do people getting this medicine do better than control groups who don't? That's how you present evidence. And what the press is doing is they're talking to one set of physicians, like that Beatrice, whatever her name is, talked to Pierre, heard all of his evidence. He presented, laid out the data, explained why this is safe medicine. Oh, then I'll go talk to someone at Hopkins or whatever it is. And then that doctor says, no, okay, well, that doctor says no, that doctor's right. Here, Dr. Corey is wrong. That's misinformation. There's no evidence that it's a miracle cure. And then that gets disseminated and people post links to all these things. You try to engage in a discussion with someone about medicine, they just post the link to that. You know,
Right.
it's just these things are meant to shut down debate.
Right.
They're meant to not encourage it. And you would think as more studies start trickling in and showing benefit as they have, you would think that this would soften. It's ramping up. The
Right.
more evidence that comes in and the closer we inch toward being, not only knowing that it works, but more precisely estimating just how much it works, which is like scary good, the rhetoric against it heats up. The censorship is heating up. The taking down of videos is heating up. When in fact, you would think as the evidence inches closer and gets more abundant, it should soften and they should start to say, okay, we know what, maybe we're not, so sure about this. We should give these people a platform. It's going in the opposite direction.
Maybe we should try talking a little bit about what some of the alternatives are. What can we do about this situation?
Well, one thing I can offer is a ray of hope from the very gloomiest place. Maybe I did a book called The Murder Room about the world's greatest, the living Sherlock Holmes, who understands more about evil than anyone alive in terms of, from Hitler to Mao Zedong to Stalin to the corner serial killer. And the defining defeat of totalitarianism is absolute power always goes too far. It always goes too far. Human beings respond. I think their weakness is literally when it sounds funny, but at the global level, at the major level of health centers where they're looking at data, they literally have forgotten we're here. And they've literally forgotten we're not data points, we're human beings, and we cannot be canceled. And this drug is the drug that cannot be canceled because this is the sign they've gone too far. And that's why all these people are here, and that's why it spreads everywhere. So I think we can wrest it back. One of the things I'd like to see, and my wife and I are going to try to do something about it, is more journalism that tells the individual human stories. How would the New York Times cover this if they cared about it? It's one thing to say that Dr. Andrew Hill was wrongly influenced, pressured, because we know he's an honorable guy. It's one thing to say that his conclusions don't match, what he found. But I heard him make this presentation to Pierre and Paul, and the two of them together, and he was moved, not to tears, but deeply moved to have 23 people in 23 countries, all, one of the top medical investigators in the world. And this is in his paper, right, Dr. Osgood? And you've written about it, Mary Beth, to have them call in and say, okay, these studies don't meet Western standards of bias, eliminating bias, but when people are living and not dying, it really doesn't matter. And it was so moving to him after 9 months of trying to find a miracle cure, or rather a silver bullet, that he found one. So to me, the answer lies in, what would the New York Times do? Is they'd send photographers and reporters to all of those countries and find all of those people who lived and didn't die. That's where the story is. That's where the story moves people. It's not in the abstract. By keeping it in the, well, you're violating your ethics and you're not answering this, we're playing the same game we're playing into their game, that it's about data and it's about abstract ideas where the human being doesn't matter. We have to show the pictures of people living and not dying, and the people who are dying because of them, and bring it to them, right to all these people. That's where I think revolutions will come from. And it's just, but I don't mean to do it as an exploitive way. It can be done, as you know, Mary Beth, with the most beautiful language. These are the people here, Betsy Ashton up there, who is, as you all know, or hope you know, is a former CBS correspondent for many years. And she tells these beautiful human stories. This is the team that does it. We just need to broaden it.
We try. Thank you. Thank you. We have a lot of questions, folks. Are you ready to take them?
Sure.
Are you ready? We have a lot more. This could go on all night, as you well know, but there are a lot of people have a lot of questions. And I'll take one that right now that is, it deals with the media message here. Are there thoughts about creating new public information resources to discuss ivermectin, censorship, and change? Some people talk about going on other platforms. There are other platforms out there. What do you think about this? I guess this would be for Mike and Mary Beth.
We need action on many, many different fronts. I've been saying for a while that I would like to see an FLCCC of lawyers, start, going to courts and filing wrongful death lawsuits, for example, more lawsuits to force hospitals to give treatment, more advocacy groups like FLCCC. We need political social action. I've toyed with the idea, and Pierre seems receptive to some sort of public demonstration, hit the streets. I kind of feel that I've been spitting into the wind for a while because I've been out here rather alone. And, I want to write more articles about people, Michael, but we need about, 1,000 more of you and me.
Well, and also, Mary Beth, we need more. I have an old friend who's a politico genius. She was on Mayor Ed Rendell's. She was libertarian, became a Republican, and had time as a Democrat on Mayor Rendell's in Philadelphia staff because she was so brilliant in policy. And this is her life, getting change, stopping the, on a regional level, stopping the what do you call it, any bureaucracy from doing something in your state. And she said, and the same applies nationally, yelling at the NIH to change their standards is never going to work because they don't have any power. Bureaucrats don't have any power. Their bosses are Congress. Their bosses control the purse. You have to make it uncomfortable as hell for the committees that Pierre was talking to and getting no results from, who sit up there like, just isolated from reality, but making protests, flood your Congress people who run that committee and say, stop doing your job, get the NIH to change its thing. That's who it goes to, not to the NIH. It goes to the politicians. There's a lot. It's just sort of like you're right, Mary Beth and Dr. Osgood. I think that this is a sort of a war that hasn't even begun. We haven't even begun to use the tools that can be used.
There is a question is there any government agency that is neutral and responsible for monitoring this kind of activity that could minimize censorship? I don't know of one. Do you?
Well, the GAO, the General Accounting Office, sometimes does some pretty good work.
Well, we've had a lot of years, a decade of new phrases sneaking in to the lexicon, like misinformation, fake news, and even hate speech. I mean, I don't want to press people's political buttons, but the original meaning of the Constitution was that it was to protect hate speech. You don't protect someone who hurts someone. You don't protect someone who breaks any kind of law but if it's not there to protect uncomfortable speech, what's it there for? So we have these overlords constantly telling us, you can't say anything. You're hurting people. The true liberal definition of free speech was what the Justice Brandeis, who stood up for the right of Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois, because the answer, he said, was more speech, not less speech. That was the traditional liberal answer to free speech problems, was more speech, not less speech. But one of the things that happened is when the liberals in the media who had a ability to have that broad-minded view were suddenly challenged by the rise of the internet and lost what they felt it was to control the narrative, and things got more, social media all kind of went to hell. So everybody's in their own little pockets trying to demean everybody else and hold on to their pockets, I think,
So by the same token, Michael, there is no regulatory solution to this problem of social media censorship, because that in itself would be a violation of the First Amendment. Congress.
Well, I think there's one regulatory answer, but it's never going to happen with the overlords of medicine and science of medicine, as Dr. Merrick calls them. And that is, as a publisher of Mountain Home Magazine and a publisher of the New York Times, if we write something that's defamatory, we can be sued. We're held responsible. But at this point, Facebook, the biggest publishers in the world, got into this ultimate power through their this congressional regulation that lets them not be responsible for what they publish. They can't be sued, and if they were
broken up.
Yeah,
I think that's ultimately, we cannot have we can't have big tech oligarchy.
Right.
These clearly have become public squares, and therefore these need to be subject to the same regulations as basically public utilities. Public squares need to be broken up, because essentially we just can't have a handful of oligarchs policing language and speech. And people will point out, well, it's not technically censorship, and this isn't a free speech. Free speech is only when the government tells you can't say something and put you in jail. Well, when a particular type of platform becomes the public square,
Right.
it functionally becomes the same thing. You
Right.
can effectively silence people according to your own whims if you hold on to one of the very few massive platforms that allows broad communication. These things need to be broken up and regulated as a public square and abide by those rules of free speech.
I agree. I mean, almost like it's like, you remember when you could hold up the phone like this and put it to your ear and you'd be talking to your cousin and say, I can't believe those bozos at the Boston Red Sox, traded for Louis Tiant at age 34 or whatever, and have someone get in and say, excuse me, sir, Louis Tiant is a legend in Puerto Rico. We're going to cut you off from your next month of talking on the phone because of that insensitive comment. That's what it's come to, as if AT&T was policing our phone calls.
We have a question on this, and then we're also going to get into some medical questions because there are a lot of people who tune in because they want to talk to the doctor. So we'll get some of that in here too.
I'll stand aside for that.
Yes, absolutely. Can't stop that. Can't stop that. But we have a couple more. First of all, there are a lot of questions about Governor DeSantis of Florida. The censorship bill passed there. Is this a good start to states taking control? It's the law against social media censorship in Florida. Is there an avenue to top the censorship, shadow banning, deplatforming, et cetera, on key social media? Your thoughts, anybody?
I have a problem with fining Facebook $250,000 per violation. I think that this approach violates the First Amendment. I don't have an answer as to how you control social media platforms, but it can be a very slippery slope when we say what they can say and what they can't say, because it'll change with the political stripe that happens to be in office as to what they can and can't say. I think we just don't have an answer from a regulatory point of view. Michael, you seem to disagree with that.
I don't really know. It just gets beyond my expertise. I think at this point we're already down the slippery slope to damage to society. So I applaud any state efforts to limit the power of big tech. I hadn't even thought of what you're saying, and I think it's a good point. I have friends who are Republicans and so forth, and they just think it's a sin to do anything against a corporation. God forbid that we should regulate the ability to make money and
well, I agree with what Eric said.
Yeah.
They're too big. They're too monopolistic.
Right.
They have too much power.
I agree too. And I think that people of like mind who might not agree in everything are going to we're going to all come together and find a way to stop big tech, to begin to slow it down at least. I think we are.
Okay, we have a question for you, Mike. And by the way, you're slipping into shadow there. Do you have a desk light that you can put on, because it's getting a little dark? Oh, that's good. I want to see your face. We all want to see you. Okay, this is a very popular question. You should have expected this. Mr. Capuzzo, in your article, you claim that President Trump received ivermectin at Walter Reed. I've checked all over the place and couldn't find any mention of ivermectin in the cocktail Trump received. Where is there information on this? Well, we know that information has been suppressed, folks. So anyway, but Mike, you can.
I guess I can issue a correction to my story. If you read my story, it says that it was Walter Reed. It also says that Pierre Corey said it. And Pierre Corey told me that. And any other questions you should ask him. I think I can say with some confidence that it's true, and that it happened not at Walter Reed, as it turned out, but before he went to Walter Reed. And I think I can say with confidence that he got ivermectin, and I leave Dr. Osgood, the real expert, to talk about whether or not. I know another doctor told me, and I don't know if you agree with this. Another doctor said when watching his miracle, reappearance in public, said he must have got ivermectin because nothing they're saying he's taking can do this. And so then it becomes a real mind-blowing question. If you were even at the New York Times or Vox, how would you interpret this? It hits so many political points of our president is dying. He's saved by a drug that could save the world. He's a populist who claims to want to save the world, but he's talking about big pharma. The reporters are covering up, or they're too stupid to find it out. It's a nightmare. But I just wish that he'd had the guts to say, you know what, I claim to be a populist, and in this case I am. I was saved by an 83-cent drug, and now we're going to let the world be saved by it.
Yes, what you know is what we all know in the FLCCC, but yes, at any rate. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of the medicine here, because a lot of people want to know if there's any date on when the iRecover trial. We've got a lot of long haulers with us, and they want to know when the iRecover trial is going to come out. Eric, do you know anything about that, Dr. Osgood?
I don't have any details about. You say you mean the iRecover protocol?
Yes, yes.
That is going to be.
I'm sorry, that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's coming soon. I don't have I can't speak to exactly when, but it's coming.
They're working on it. That's as much as I know. Yeah. And they think a week maybe or something like that, but
something in that ballpark.
Okay. We have other questions that are dealing with the vaccines. Why? Oh, one question. Can you take ivermectin when you're on blood thinners?
If it's warfarin, you are going to want to be very careful with that, because warfarin makes your blood thin by raising a number called INR. If you mix that with ivermectin, your blood can get too thin, and you would have to adjust your dose of warfarin. So only under medical supervision and only with very careful monitoring of your blood thinner. If you are on any other forms of blood thinners, there are no interactions that I know of. But again, this is not personal medical advice to whoever's asking this question. This is something to discuss with your physician. To my knowledge, though, the novel anticoagulant or blood thinners don't interact with ivermectin, but warfarin, the old school one, does. And that can be a problem. That can be an inhibitor.
Another one now, since vaccinations are now widely open to 15-year-olds and up, will there be a children's protocol from the FLCCC for age 2 and up?
It's a very good question. It's a good question. I'll have to talk about that with the team. Yeah.
All we know in discussions and in studies that have been done, I mean, ivermectin has been given to children around the world as a preventive for all these different antiparasitic diseases. And I did interview one pediatrician, and she said that it is safe. She had given it to a 10-month-old who had COVID. But I don't know what our team plans to do on this. That's as much as we've heard from doctors, but it's an incredibly safe drug is what we've been told.
And in one of your incredible interviews, Betsy, didn't that woman say, the pediatrician in Philly, that she actually, a baby was with it, and so she gave the mother, and through the breast milk, the baby was able to get a diluted amount. It worked. Yes,
that is exactly how that was the mechanism that worked. Exactly. Yes. So another question was, is there a minimum age for using the ivermectin protocol for early treatment at this point in time? Do we stipulate that?
We don't have necessarily a minimum age. That's a decision to make with the pediatrician.
Okay.
I think as you get younger and younger, again, the risk of progressing to severe disease is less and less. So, again, giving medicine there should always be a necessity to give a medicine. So far, the data that we have with pediatrics is that the children who are progressing to get very sick are children that have underlying medical conditions who are at high risk. There haven't really been deaths in pediatrics in a substantial amount that have been otherwise healthy children. So if there is a child that has significant underlying medical conditions, risk factors for severe progression, that's somebody where you'd want to consider it. Otherwise, again, it's a safe medicine. It's an individual risk call. You can say that the likelihood is that the child will recover and be okay. You could also say, you know what? This child could be out of school and sick for a week. That's not nothing. I mean, that can be disruptive to a child. That child can end up with some long haul symptoms. If you start that treatment early, you can reduce the viral replication and maybe accelerate the clinical improvement of that child, reduce their chance of going on to have long haul disease. So it's an individual decision to be made between the parent and the pediatrician. But no, there isn't a minimum age. It's been used in all ages.
We have another question following up with that. Does ivermectin work with diabetics taking insulin? Is it okay for them?
Sure. I mean, that's a really an ideal kind of patient to treat, because the insulin dependent diabetic is the kind of patient who is going to be at increased risk for severe progression. So, that's somebody particularly who you'd want to use it. And again, early. My approach with people that I'm treating is that as long as we're in this pandemic, you tell me you're sick with a viral or flu-like syndrome, it's COVID first, ask questions later. I start the ivermectin. I tell you to go get a test. Usually, if you do it that way, by the time you get your test, you're starting to feel better already. As opposed to wait till you get your test result. I'm sick, I'm positive. Every 9 hours, that virus is doubling, replicating. The longer you wait to start the ivermectin, it still works, but not as well. The earlier you get that in your system, the better and stronger of an effect it's going to have. And the ideal patient to benefit from it is somebody who is at risk for progression, such as an insulin-dependent diabetic.
Here's a question that's going to bring the journalists back in. This is for everybody. Why is there no discussion about the side effects of the vaccinations? Any studies going on about them?
Did you report, Mary Beth, you're on top of all of this, that what did Facebook whistleblowers?
There were two whistleblowers who came forward to Project Veritas with documents basically outlining the approach of Facebook to what they're calling vaccine hesitancy. So you can be basically categorized as a vaccine hesitancy person, a VH, and your comments will appear less frequently. Your posts will not be seen, and you do face other kinds of actions by Facebook, presumably banning at some point. But the other thing was that it could be something true that's being reported, a 16-year-old dying after getting the vaccine and so forth. Pretty horrifying on Facebook's part, I find basically that Facebook is really the worst platform in terms of censorship. I find myself self-censoring a lot. I think all of us are doing that. This is unfortunately a reality. But they seem to be much, much more rigged in terms of, acting quickly against all things ivermectin and anti-vaccine.
I think also horrifying on the with the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and ABC and Fox and all the rest of them, because Pierre keeps putting forward the idea off of, and I would love to hear from Dr. Osgood if you know how to access that World Health Organization adverse reporting page and how people can look it up themselves. But from what he said recently, there had already been 4,000 deaths reported around the world from the vaccines and many tens of thousands of adverse reactions, and on a trajectory to have 12,000 deaths from the vaccines in a year. One of the problems that the media faces in this is, first of all, I think it's indefensible that they're not reporting that, and instead an Anderson Cooper will get on and say, or Dr. Gupta, that it's perfectly safe and that nobody's died or whatever. That's like flat out lying, and I lose faith in them because of it. On the other hand, I understand some of what they do with hurricanes. They go to the experts at the National Hurricane Center, and the National Hurricane Center says, scare the crap out of everyone because otherwise they won't leave, otherwise they won't do the right thing, and we're going to have lots of problems. So I can understand concerns. I understand, but don't fully understand. To say if we report 4,000 people have died, then fewer people are going to want it. People are going to panic, but they need to just do a better job of putting it all in context and say, well, it's still statistically safe. It's still your best bet. But to have people like, who was it? Marvelous Marvin Hagler, the legendary heavyweight, who died. And hours before he died, Thomas Hearns, another legendary heavyweight, we're talking about Ali and Frazier of these lower weight, classes, went on Facebook and said, everyone pray for my buddy Marvin Hagler, my longtime combatant, who is dying from the shot he just got. And so I don't know if it's true or not. I just know that when ABC and AP and everybody else shuts down discussion and punishes discussion about that, you lose treatment, you lose trust in society and in the media,
Yes.
And
I'm waiting to see
the dignity of the death of a marvelous Marvin Hagler.
Yeah.
So, this is a tough discussion because, the whole discussion becomes so sectarian when it really shouldn't. And the way that it has gone about from both sides is a little bit off. And the way I look at it is this: anytime you are going to take any intervention, a vaccine, and you are going to administer it to hundreds of millions to billions of people, you have to understand that there are negative medical safety endpoints, whether it's heart attacks, strokes, clots in the lungs, et cetera, that have annual incidences of X per 100,000 per year. So as you apply any intervention to billions of people, you are going to have events that happen in proximity to people getting vaccines. And as time goes on, it is a very challenging task to figure out when it is causative, when it is not. There are epidemiological techniques on how to do that. The Vaccine Adverse Reporting System, VAERS, is essentially a platform really designed for healthcare practitioners, providers, to go enter information when somebody who has gotten a vaccine has some kind of negative endpoint. When something goes into that, or what you mentioned is VIGI-Access, which is an individual's access to VIGI-Base. That's the World Health Organization's safety pharmacovigilance database. You go to VIGI-Access, you can Google it, you go in there, you can look up whatever you want, COVID-19 vaccines, ivermectin, anything. Same thing with VAERS. Because something shows up in those systems does not mean that it's causative. It means that it happened and a physician wrote about it, and it takes the CDC time to tease those things out. And so what you have is you have one group of people saying, aha, it's showing up in VAERS, that means it's VAERS, that means it's causative, when you can't necessarily say that. On the other hand, though, you have people like, oh, VAERS, anybody could go on that and just write anything. And it's like, well, that's not true either. The information that it asks for, patient name, physician name, where you got it, which dose you got, the nature of the action, what hospital you're treated at, medicines, tests, blood work. I mean, it also says if you falsify information on here, you can be imprisoned. So the notion that people are just going on this platform and willy-nilly making up vaccine reactions to stoke fear is absurd. At the same time,
what we need, though, is the media to report all of what you just said and to put these numbers into context. And I'm still waiting for that really great investigative story that says, yes, 4,000 deaths. And how does this compare to polio vaccines or Ebola vaccine or whatever?
Right. Or ivermectin with only 12 deaths or something, 16 deaths, like one every other year for 40 years. I mean, hello. That's kind of dramatic when you have hundreds in just a couple of months. That could anyway. Well, we have to have our last question here because we've run out of time, folks. And I promised to get this one in. One of our loyal followers, Michelle Rabin, yes, I'm getting it in tonight. She's been asking this for a while. And it's a question that applies to a lot of us. Those who are on the iMask Plus protocol, prophylaxis, taking ivermectin and the vitamins, the vitamin C, D, zinc, and everything. Okay, we've all just now heard that vaccinated people can take the masks off in many places. Does that apply to people on the iMask protocol or taking ivermectin? Do we need to mask up all the time? Now, I will say that I put this to Dr. Corey earlier today, and his reply was, well, first of all, outside, where you have breezes going by, you really don't need to wear a mask outside in the fresh air because the aerosols dissipates. The question is what happens inside. And he was saying, and I hope I've gotten this right, it was a quick conversation, that you need to be wise and you should wear masks still in places, certainly in a crowded airplane, in a crowded subway, in a crowded train, something like that. It's probably smart to do so. The question is, what to do if you're in a large room with a high ceiling and few people. What do you think, Dr. Osgood? Where do you go on this? What do people do?
Yeah, what I would say is if you're taking iMask Plus, what that medicine is doing is it is making it so that the virus can't get a hold of the machinery of your cell, which is called your nucleus, to start making more and more and more viruses. It's suppressing the part of your immune system that's going to make you really sick. The problem, though, is can enough of that virus build up a presence inside your nose and inside your mouth where you can then breathe it onto someone else and get them sick? So for the sake of public safety, for the sake of public health, for the sake of me not wanting this to get taken down from YouTube, I'm going to say that, yes, if you are not vaccinated and you are indoors and in crowds, you should be wearing a mask. We want to protect ourselves. You want to protect other people as well. That's the answer that you're going to get from me.
That's a good answer. And thank you. Thank you, Dr. Osgood. Thank you, Mike Capuzzo. Thank you, Mary Beth Pfeiffer. You've been terrific tonight. That's all the time we have, folks, for this. And if we didn't get your question in, come back next week. We'll be here 7:00 Eastern time. What's that? 4:00 Pacific and everything in between. We will be here and we'll take more questions, and we'll have another topic that will hopefully be just as lively. In the meantime, if you want to keep up with what we're doing, since we seem to be getting pushed around, you can check us, on the website. The website is there, FLCCC.net. Go there. You can sign up to be a member of our alliance. We do send emails out of things that happen. We try not to do too many of them, but at any rate, that way you can be part of us. And if we ever organize something more and we can draw you in many ways, well, we'll know how to reach out to you. At any rate, and of course, the videos that we have there and the information that we have there, we want you to share on your sites as much as possible to help your friends and family have the information that we think is very helpful and can make them healthy. Remember, we have that wonderful scientific review of ivermectin. We have a 1-page of it. We have executive summaries of all of this. It's all on the website, flccc.net. And also, thank you. Thank you for watching tonight. Thank you to those of you who have been sending us donations. We are so grateful. That's what helps us to take control of the emails and to get this webinar up. We hope you will stay well. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.